Hey guys, what's going on? It's Coach BJ here with another installment of Behind the Scenes. This is a series, or it's a type of video that I put out that shows you either things I do behind the scenes to analyze performance metrics, or it's a type of exercise that I want you guys to be able to learn about. This video today was prompted by David. He asked for some of these modalities and some of these protocols. So we're going to talk about conjugate isometric training. It's putting a yielding isometric with an overcoming isometric. Before we get too far into the weeds, like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel, so I really appreciate that. And if you have any questions, pop it in the chat below. I'll get back to it as soon as I can. Conjugate typically means doing two things at the same time, or doing two things within the same session, within the same lift. So we're going to do this conjugate isometric training where we mix yielding isometric with overcoming. Yielding isometrics, or more commonly known as pauses, are when you yield the forces that are lifting the bar to the forces that are pulling the bar down. So the weight of the bar and gravity. And you meet in the middle, so that makes the bar just stop moving. So a pause. An overcoming isometric, which is also known as max voluntary isometric contraction, or MVIC. I call it MVIC because it's quick. Overcoming, or MVIC, that's when you're trying to move an object that is immovable for whatever reason. So we have yielding, where you're choosing to pause, and we have overcoming, where you're really trying to move it, but it's not going to move. We put those together, and that's our conjugate iso. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to do it first, why it's good, and then at the end, when to do it, when it's going to be helpful for you in your sports performance endeavor. All right, so let's take a look at our protocol here. Some of this we're going to ignore. So we're going to pause at the bottom third of the movement and the top third of the movement. What I would suggest is taking this off of joint angle. So we're looking for 90-degree angle pause at the bottom. So that's your bottom third. For a deadlift, you're almost never going to hit 90 degrees at the knee. So I base it off of the hip, but if you were squatting, I would base it off of the knee. 90 degrees at the knee is your yielding, or your pause. And then up at the top, we're at the top third, 20-30 degrees before lockout. So almost at lockout. Let's ignore 60 seconds off per leg. That's going to be for a different protocol than we want to talk about today. But we are going to do about 3 to 4 reps per set. And we're going to do about 3 to 5 seconds yielding at the bottom, so at our pause, and then 3 to 5 seconds overcoming at the top, which is our almost lockout, 20-30 degrees before lockout, max voluntary isometric contraction. So let's take a look at this setup. All right, so let's just pause it here. I'm standing on a plate. This is a homegrown solution. This is an easy to set up solution. I've actually created my own isometric board. That's a platform, a wooden platform with some metal supports underneath that have eye hooks or eye screws coming through the metal up through the wood that I can hook carabiners and chains into and use them for isometric pulling. Relatively cheap and easy to make, but that's a specialty item. That's a platform made just for isometrics, where this is something you can do with almost no extra equipment other than just getting straps. You can just use the plates that you have at your gym. So let's take a look. I'm standing on a plate that's elevated because I needed a space underneath the plate for me to anchor the strap. The strap is anchored to a rod of metal underneath the plate so that the strap won't pull through the hole of the plate. Then the straps are connected with carabiners up to the bar. The straps are rated for about a ton of weight. So I got some pretty heavy duty straps just to make sure that they don't break. And I just looped it around the bar. Pretty straightforward. I would have probably liked to be a little bit more upright on this. I would have wanted the bar to be a little bit more mid-thigh, but this is how I ended up measuring it on the day, and that's okay. Here we go. This is my pause. Bottom third of the movement. I'm going to pause here and yield to forces, and then I get to the top, and I pull against it as hard as I can. You can even see that bar was whipping a little bit with the force of the pull. So I'm pulling up as hard as I can against that bar, and that's our MVIC. So we'll do it again. We're down here for our pause, and then we're up here, max isometric contraction. Okay, so let's put it down, look at it from the side, and just get a different view here. Picking it up the first time, I never do max isometric pull on the first one. I would stand up as far as you can first, no force on the bar other than picking it up. And then I would lower. I would start at the top and lower down to your first yielding. So that first pickup is not part of the effort. We're yielding here, and then max voluntary lift right there. And then yielding, and then MVic at the top, and we'll put it down. Oh, I'll do one more. And MVic, and then put it down. Okay, so let's just talk about these a little bit. So that's how to do this movement. There are plenty of other protocols that you can get creative with. This happens to be the most accessible, or the least, you have to be the least inventive to set this one up. There are ways to do it with the squat that are challenging. So we've done this with a squat with spotter straps or spotter pins, what you would normally put under the bar so that if you lose it, you could drop the bar on the straps or the pins. So we can do this underneath those pins. I find it really challenging or difficult to get people to have a bar, get it onto their back in a position or in a situation where you cannot stand fully straight up. But we're not going to go into those today. We're just going to talk about the most accessible version that I've come up with, and that is tying down the deadlift and doing it with a bar or a pull. This, I was really inspired by the isometric mid-thigh pull, the IMTP, which is a great tool for measuring sports performance and central nervous system readiness. It's a staple in strength and conditioning testing, so that's why I was really inspired to recreate that movement with this particular type of conjugate. Let's talk a little bit about why this works, and we're gonna gloss through this because I find that a lot of people are not super into the science of why it works. They're more interested in how does this make me faster and how do I do it. But we'll talk briefly about these. So with yielding isometric or pauses, what happens is there's a lengthening in the tissue, stretching, and the muscle spindles will stretch, which are these mechanisms inside the muscles, and they'll stretch and they sense how stretched the tissue is. They send those signals back to the brain, and that's how you know where your body is in space, because the muscle spindles will detect stretch, so that adds to proprioception, or knowing where your body is in space. That's why you're able to close your eyes and touch your fingertips together without looking, because your body knows where it is in space. So we use yielding isometrics a lot, or pauses, to reinforce different positions, to clean up form and movement patterning or motor patterning. We use them because it increases proprioception. So pre-stretching that muscle and holding a good, getting the muscle spindles activated, that's going to increase proprioception. So it's good for form, A. Then the pre-stretching of the muscle tissue and the muscle spindles will set you up for a very forceful max isometric contraction. There's a couple reasons for that. One of the things we want to think of is the Golgi tendon reflex, or autonomic inhibition. We'll gloss through this pretty quickly, but basically the GT reflex feels stretch and strain or excessive strain on the ligaments and the tendons and the tissue, and it will loosen the contraction in order to protect your ligaments and your tissue. So the Golgi tendon reflex will loosen the contraction. However, pre-stretching those muscle spindles, getting those muscle spindles activated, the muscle spindles transmit a faster axon. So you're going to get the signal from a pre-stretched muscle spindle faster than the GT reflex can kick in. So we're able to go right into an isometric contraction, or an MVic, with very little GT reflex going on. So moving on to why we do MVics at all, like why do we do overcoming isometrics, and why do we hold them for 3 to 5 seconds? That's really because with these max voluntary isometric contractions and holding them for 3 to 5 seconds, we can activate, or we can get more high threshold motor units engaged or activated than without. And this is through the process of temporal summation. We're going to breeze through this, give you a little analogy. It's not exactly how it works, but just come on this journey with me. You're trying to lift a car off the ground. You're lifting as hard as you can. It won't move. So you recruit some friends nearby. They come by. Everyone's pulling up against that car. It's about to move, but not quite. Some more friends come by. Everyone pulls up against the car. It eventually moves. That's the process of temporal summation, but with motor units. So temporal summation, we push against that immovable object, and when it doesn't move, we're innervating more and more tissue. We're getting more and more motor units engaged because we're trying to move something that won't move, but we keep trying. So target time for that is 3 to 5 seconds because we want it to be long enough to get enough motor unit recruitment, but we want it to be short enough to still be alactic. So some of the byproducts of the things we've already mentioned is increased neural drive that goes along with the temporal summation and the increased drive on the MVIC because of the pre-stretching of the muscle spindles. We're going to get more muscular articular stiffness as a result of the training, which results in better rate of force development. These are all kind of buzzwords. We don't really need to get into the whole mechanism of it, but MA stiffness is good for a reactive strength index or for, how forceful you can be over a short period of time. And it's going to increase rate of force production, which is just how quickly can you get up to your peak force. So that's really what's going to be increased here as a result of some of the other mechanisms I've mentioned. When and why? These conjugates are great for being relatively low fatigue because we're doing the efforts in an alactic scenario. So, we go through an alactic energy system, we go glycolytic, and then we go oxidative, we go endurance. So we're going to keep these efforts 3 to 5 seconds to keep them alactic because we're under, 8 to 10 seconds where you would start switching more glycolytic and therefore producing a little bit more residual fatigue in the muscle tissue. So we're staying alactic on these efforts, which produces very little fatigue, which makes this great for a taper, a power production series, something where you're going to get peak force, peak work, low fatigue. And that's what's important in a taper is we want to be able to have high intensity with low volume. We don't want a ton of volume. We don't want a ton of residual fatigue, but we want to stimulate high motor unit recruitment. We want to stimulate high power output so that we can continue to put out high forceful movements with very little residual fatigue going into a competition. This is also great for extending a peak. Let's say you get peaked and you have 3 races, 1 per week, or 3 races over the course of a month and a half. You might need to extend that taper a little bit. You can't necessarily go back and work on strength because you only have 10 days until the next race. These are a great low fatigue way of stimulating high motor unit recruitment with very little fatigue. So that's where I end up using these the most. I also use these, I don't always program linearly or from the base up. Sometimes we have a period where I will assess where you're at. What is your rate of torque development? What is your rate of power development? What are these different metrics that we're looking at? And we'll pick one that you're struggling with. And if I decide we need to go through a peak power phase to increase your ability to have a higher rate of force development, get to the power a little bit quicker, raise that power a little bit, we'll do this in that phase. So a peak power phase, I'll often prescribe something like this or similar movements. As for how much weight to use for the yielding isometric part, probably around 40% of your 1 rep max, all the way up to maybe 65%. We don't really want to get into the 70% plus. Once you start getting that heavy, the weight doesn't move fast enough from the yielding to the max, the MVIC. And it also, the feeling of how heavy it is in your hands tends to take away from how forceful you are with the drive on the MVIC. So 45 to 65 on your yielding or on the actual weight on the bar is a good place to go. I would just start with 40, see how it feels, work your way up, see what's most successful for you. But we want to be under 70%. All right, guys, so that's my version, my protocol for the conjugate isometrics. Plenty of other protocols for like squat and bench and rows, all of those things that can be done. This is the most accessible, is just to do it with deadlift. And it carries over well to a lot of different leg-focused sports, running, sprinting, jumping. If you have any questions, pop them in the comment section below. I'll get back to it as soon as I can. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time, get smart, be strong, go fast.